Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. This is the ITUC's webinar on data, DOGE, and democracy. We will begin in just a minute as we see more people filing into the room. A reminder that if you need interpretation, it's available in English, Spanish, and French. You can set this to the channel, the interpretation channel of your choice on the bottom of your screen by selecting interpretation, or you can use the three little dots if you're on a phone or iPad and select interpretation and then your language of choice. Okay, we have more people coming in, but we will get started and be on time today. My name is Todd Brogan. I'm the Director of Campaigns and Organizing for the International Trade Union Confederation, based in Brussels, Belgium. Today, we have a webinar on data, DOGE, and democracy. And for those who don't know, DOGE stands for the Department of Government Efficiency. It's not a real department, but it is a function that has been created and is wreaking havoc across the US federal system as we speak. And to tell us about this and about how people are fighting back and about the threats, we're joined today by Amanda Ballantyne. Amanda is the executive director of the AFL-CIO Working for America Institute in the AFL-CIO Technology Institute, where she works to develop strategies to engage workers in the innovation process. Amanda is also an expert on digital tech as it impacts labor, jobs, and workers. So she works closely with unions and worker advocates to educate and engage on a broad set of stakeholders on impacts of artificial intelligence and related technologies on work and working people, and on elevating worker voices on practical and ethical implications of AI and machine learning technologies. So Amanda is going to speak to us for about 25 minutes today to start us off, and then we want to open up a conversation with the rest of you. So we're eager to have you raise your digital hands or enter into the chat, ask questions, make your comments, and we'll try to have a nice trade union style conversation in today's meeting. We will plan to end on time at 4 p.m. Central European Summer Time. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amanda, and just let me know when you'd like me to share slides, Amanda.
That's great. And you can put up the slides now, and I'll let you know as we proceed. So first of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk in more detail about the ways in which DOGE is using databases to really undercut democracy and worker rights. Um, it's a it's a it's a scary thing, and I think the reason we felt the urgency to sort of share it with a more global audience, and at least these elements of it, was that there are a number of countries where there's already a deep alignment between big tech and government technology in a way that really harms democracy and worker privacy. There are other states that have protections around this. And I think that what we've been watching in the United States has been really remarkable in terms of um, how quickly the DOGE was able to consolidate databases and use them to essentially keyword search and delete government programs that they didn't like or people that they didn't like before the courts could act, and whether the courts even really understand the harm of the type of database integration and consolidation that's happening. And so we wanted to share really just an overview of what has happened with DOGE and data so that people have some visibility into it beyond just the sort of shocking headlines that keep coming out. So I'm Amanda Ballantyne. I run the AFL-CIO Technology Institute. I'm speaking to you this morning from Boston, Massachusetts. We're meeting today with the city of Boston to talk about how Boston is implementing AI in government, which is a different picture than sort of what's happening at the federal level in the United States. So we'll start by saying, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, that Elon Musk, in the beginning of the Trump administration, was the richest man in the world. He spent an enormous amount of money, maybe $237 million, to help Donald Trump get elected, and quickly became what they call a special government employee. I'll let you know that I am also a special government employee. Special government employees is a a sort of title that's given to people who are sort of volunteering in government to offer opinions and advice. I'm on several federal advisory committees, and that is the title in which Elon Musk came in to the government. It's a sort of designation that doesn't require security clearance, and certainly doesn't have the high level of scrutiny that normal government employees have to have in order to access government data. Go ahead to the next slide. So the DOGE is, again, it's not a real department. It's the Department of Government Efficiency. Um, and the focus of it and sort of how it promotes itself via social media is this idea of making government more efficient. And sort of key in that is both um, really diminishing the federal workforce as quickly as possible, and this idea that the federal workforce can really be replaced by artificial intelligence and other data-driven technologies. Elon Musk, as you know, I've just described him, is a prominent tech figure, very, very conflicted by his investments in China. He has, I think, super governmental business interests, including his satellite network and his SpaceX, which has very, very deep ties both to the Pentagon in the United States and also NASA. So Musk himself is the recipient of massive amounts of federal money, and is now, or until, basically last week, has been rooting through our government databases without a lot of transparency. Um, in the United States, this has broken several laws, and I will talk about what those laws are. The courts are not able to keep up with the speed at which this has happened. And I think the real harm is that once the databases have been integrated, it's very hard to know what's happening with the data, who has access to it, what's being done with it. Go to the next slide. So we know that Elon Musk and his Doge team is primarily made up of very low level software engineers who he's brought into government. In the early days, there was a sort of shakedown, really. Like Elon Musk and his software engineers would go from department building to department building and demand codes and access major government databases. And if the government officials who held access to those databases refused, they were essentially frog marched out of the building um, and lost their jobs. And through those early days, the access to government databases was, I would say, illegal and broke a number of laws. DOGE also sort of learned as the lawsuits were being filed, and they started installing these software engineers in the government agencies, so that the software engineers essentially became staff of the government agencies. So there was a transition about how they were accessing the database. But Elon Musk has said that they've accessed essentially every major database in the US government. We know that at least in one agency and probably more, these software engineers hooked up private servers that did not have they didn't have sort of security protocols or a connection to the government. They just literally walked in and hooked up private servers. And we know in other places the software engineers were given edit access to major databases, like our Department of Treasury databases, which houses almost all of the government payments, the non-Pentagon, non-defense payments. So $7 trillion. Go to the next slide. So there are a number of harms. Obviously, they're very, very pragmatic that start, there's like a gradient here, right? There's the sort of the harms about these software engineers who are low level, who do not have the high level of expertise that's required to have access to these databases, potentially breaking things, not really understanding how the databases function or what they're coded to do. And so creating errors, big errors that could prevent people from getting valuable benefits from the government, like Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare. They could, put a business on a do not pay list and basically destroy a business. You're starting to see stories of immigrants who are being deported even if they have green cards, like accidentally. And also US citizens have, several US citizens have been deported accidentally. So there's, first of all, this sort of risk of sort of harm and error. But the risks escalate to include really significant cybersecurity and privacy risks, the disclosure of incredibly sensitive personal information on every single American, on every single business that does business with the U.S. government, of every single person who's filed a claim for unfair work treatment at the Department of Labor or the National Labor Relations Board. All of that data is potentially compromised. And we know that there are, a lot of really important sort of security issues around those data points, both for people and also for the government. Go to the next slide. So it's important to understand that over the past maybe 30 years, data has become the lifeblood of government, right? And so in the United States, data is distributed throughout our many, many federal agencies in specific databases that have specific management protocols. And nobody really has what they would call God tier access to be able to look at all of the data. And there's a reason for that. That's because it's highly sensitive, extremely valuable data, and its misuse or abuse can cause incredible harm, as I just described. There are, I would say, probably, I've heard people estimate, 500,000 databases in the government system. And they are, again, all distributed across agencies with different levels of sort of access to them. But this is a really good list of sort of issues that we would be concerned about in terms of the type of data that is being accessed and that DOGE has sought to access. The big concern here starts to be a concern about kind of the melding of public and private interests in the creation of a surveillance state. We've already heard that the ICE in the United States is starting to build a database of all of the immigrants in the United States, where they're centralizing data across all of these agencies and putting it into one place in a law enforcement agency. The data that exists is not only data related to people's immigration status, mixed family status. If someone has filed a student loan application for their children and they live in a family where one parent is undocumented and one is not, that data becomes immediately available by combining the immigration databases and the student loan databases, the education databases. They're consolidating information on people's mental health issues and the immigration databases. And so there's this ability to start integrating data in a way that gives the government a remarkable amount of easy to access profiling information on individuals, on businesses, on, activists around on union people. And again, the ability to sort of keyword search and delete through the use of artificial intelligence. Go to the next slide. Here's some more. One of the things that we are very focused on and have been focused on since the beginning is that this isn't just a sort of random, oh, we want to make government better, so we're going to combine all these databases. In the first few days of the Trump administration, the DOGE targeted what we would say are the sort of central nervous system of government data. And so we would say it's the Department of Treasury, which handles all of the payments to businesses and the American people. So anybody who has a government contract, essentially, that's non-defense related is moved through the Treasury Department. That's also where the IRS and tax income and data is for everybody. The Office of Personnel Management is where private servers were hooked in. The Office of Personnel Management is essentially the HR function of the federal government. So it manages healthcare for federal employees. It manages, pay issues. It manages seniority issues. It manages discipline, discharge, all of those records. But the Office of Personnel Management doesn't make employment decisions, right? Those employment decisions are made by the agencies. What DOGE did was walk into the Office of Personnel Management, plug in private servers, and then create a database of all of the federal workers so that it could start emailing them directly without having to go through their existing agencies to start terminating and laying off staff and requiring them to report on their activities in different ways. Again, it's not a human being or person who is looking into the management structure of the federal workers. It's not a person who's looking into the reports that these workers are supposed to turn in. It's an AI bot that is essentially making really fast and quick decisions about workers who will be laid off, terminated, or discharged for many reasons. So the access to and consolidation of the databases through the Office of Personnel Management essentially enabled um, the DOGE to start the massive layoffs and the sort of federal worker, um, just massive disruption in our government. So it's important to understand that that would not have been possible in any way if it hadn't been for the illegal access, download, and the use of AI systems to consolidate that data and start sort of riffing people. Go to the next slide. The other two places where we're very focused is the General Services Administration, which is essentially the sort of IT services for the government. It's an agency that is pretty obscure, like it's not well known popularly, but they operate all of the buildings and the sort of leasing for the buildings, federal buildings. They operate all of the computer and IT systems. They have the ability to sort of monitor and check and fix databases. They do procurement around technology issues. And so this agency has an enormous amount of insight into the technological function of the federal government. And the people who work there are people who deeply, deeply understand the complexity, who have deep understanding of the law, and who really have you know, a critically important function in making sure that the sort of data lifeblood of the government is functional. Um, there have been efforts to consolidate all of the data from across these agencies into the General Services Administration to create those types of global databases, like we're hearing right now about the immigration database. But through the General Services Administration, the DOGE has been able to really develop its understanding capacity of like what data exists, where, what's valuable, what's not. And then finally, we're very focused on the Department of Commerce. The Department of Commerce has, I think, it has hundreds of thousands of databases internally. The Department of Commerce manages a lot of things, including our economic development work. It has all of our AI management sort of work over the past 4 years has been done in the Department of Commerce. But most importantly, it houses the census. And the census in the United States is basically that every 10 years, there's an assessment of where people live, what their jobs are, economic diversity, what communities look like. I mean, we literally every 10 years send thousands and thousands of people to knock on every single door in the United States and tally up who lives there and kind of what they do for a living. So it is essentially it's the data analytics center of the government, and census data is used to decide congressional districts for voting. It's used to decide where impoverished districts are that need extra federal aid. It paints a picture of what life is like in America. And so not only does the census have a really big impact on the political makeup of the United States in terms of how elections are districted, it also has a remarkable storytelling capacity. And we know that we live in an environment with a president who is, to put it politely, uh, capable of creating his own reality. And we know that Elon Musk has enormous communications platform and the ability to sort of manipulate, for example, job data or to manipulate economic development data or the ability to manipulate racial and demographic data, the ability to sort of influence congressional redistricting. These are all things that could be done with Census Department data. Go to the next slide. So part of the way that this issue is being talked about in the United States has to do with personal data. Like, is it a violation of our personal individual liberties as America? Like, is this a civil liberties violation to have all of this personal data, A, at risk, or B, being consolidated? And so there's this sort of personal privacy narrative around that. And that is a very important narrative in the United States. But we have found that um, that narrative is not as powerful with people who've had their data hacked, over the past 10 or 15 years so many times. But it's important to understand that this is the type of data that can be accessed and consolidated on like the vast majority of Americans. And imagine putting all of this data into databases that A, can be used to make decisions, major decisions about people's lives, or B, could be cyber attacked and sort of disclosed on the dark web. The harms are sort of remarkable. Go to the next slide, please. Here are some of the ways that data could be misused. It could be sold, private information about people to businesses and companies. We know from our work on AI that data is really the lifeblood of AI, and big tech companies are just ravenous for new data sources. Government data is it's better data often than other data, and sort of consolidating it in a way that sort of does the integration is a very valuable thing. And so we do believe that there's reason to be concerned that Elon Musk has privatized some of this data, has essentially stolen it. There are questions about whether he's trained his own AI models on it. Sort of how do you bring in AI models to start making major decisions in the US government without training it on the data, for example? So there are big questions about whether there's been personal enrichment. We've also seen several examples of Musk finding contracts of his competitors and deciding that he would rather line up his own businesses. So a few weeks ago, there was an example where Verizon had a $3 billion contract uh, with the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and Musk decided of his own volition that he didn't like that contract, and so he put an enormous amount of pressure on FAA agents to cancel the Verizon contract. Verizon, by the way, is a unionized company, and instead to line up SpaceX for the work. And we've seen different examples of that. Musk getting special treatment around, you know, uh, what, his own businesses. I've talked about hacking and cybersecurity issues. We also know that very early on, the government started installing sort of tracking software on government workers' computers and AI software monitors on government workers' phones. Those were sort of keyword searchable, and that was very connected to the effort to try and root out sort of woke um, grants, federal grants, because there was a concern by the Trump administration that um, that government workers would try and be sneaky and make sure their grants still got funded, even if they were funding diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. And so there was this, all of the government workers are now actively being surveilled by AI tools. And that's been a sort of really significant concern among the federal workforce. We know also that Musk has a long history of doxing people and bullying them. And we saw that with a number of the government workers who were resisting having their information posted online. There were stories about entire agencies having pizza sent to their people at their home addresses, intimidation and threats. And those things are sort of part and parcel of the X universe, but that sort of bullying spirit has come into a lot of the work, especially around how resistors are being treated. And then, of course, we've seen, in recent weeks, efforts to strip bargaining rights from federal workers. We've seen these massive, like, kind of efforts to just kind of willy-nilly use AI systems to decide what workers got to keep their jobs or not. And we know, I mean, part of what underlies all of this is that we know that these technologies are not really that good. They're pretty clunky technologies. AI systems make mistakes, they hallucinate, and it takes a lot of time and effort to train them to be accurate. We also know, because we're in the labor movement, that one of our core demands is that workers need to be decision makers in how these technologies are used, because workers really are the experts. Workers can look at what an AI system is doing and decide whether or not it's functioning correctly. Elon Musk and Trump, in the very beginning of the Trump administration, fired all of the workers who would be able to look at the outcome of these AI systems and say whether they were making accurate work or not. So Ann Lewis, who is the head of tech transformation at the General Services Administration, Erie Meyer, who directed our Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. There are other people who have been very, very public, who were pushed out of the administration, who really were the experts on how these databases function and on how to implement AI systems into them. So understand that this is not about efficiency. This is not about any kind of a reasonable effort to do responsible tech transformation of government. This is about removing the people who are capable of doing responsible tech transformation and shaking down the government. And this is where we get into big questions about democracy. When I showed the slides about the sort of nerve system of government, what you're seeing there is an effort by Elon Musk and Trump to consolidate data into the executive branch. And that data consolidation gives the executive branch in the United States more power to make decisions about what the government pays for, who works for the government, what programs are funded, than is allowable in the US system traditionally. So it's a reshaping of our government, but not just the tech systems in our government. It's a reshaping of power in our government. It's consolidating power in the executive branch. And I will tell you, our courts do not understand the harms. So our courts are looking at the harms to individual people in the traditional way, and they don't understand that the harm is actually the consolidation of the data. The harm is the lack of transparency around what's being done with the data and how it's being used. The harm is the AI systems that are sort of just rifling through the government and really undermining the authority of Congress and the authority of the courts. Go to the next slide. So we have these sort of pretty deep concerns about democracy, but I think there's also, how does this pragmatically impact regular people? As you know, in the United States, Donald Trump did win the popular election. Democracy messages work with a broad set of folks in the United States, but many people in the United States are really, it's a tough place to live if you're not sort of in the middle class. And I think we have to really focus on how these changes in government will also impact everyday people, right? We have the big questions about government, but we also have this conversation we need to have with people from an organizing perspective so they understand what's at stake, not just in terms of our democracy, but also in terms of like how it could impact themselves, their families, their communities. So I talked earlier about how people could just maybe not get their Social Security checks or tax refunds. That could be something that happens because the Trump administration decides not to issue those things. Or it could be something that happens when one of these databases is accidentally broken. The databases in the United States are 70 years old. I mean, they started being built in the 1970s. So I should say, 50 years old. And they've been sort of built and developed and patched over time. And so they are remarkably complex, and they also have, decades of development, right? And so there aren't very many people in the United States who really understand the complexity of how they work and how they function. And so a really basic concern that we have is, what if they break the Social Security system and it takes 3 months to fix it? Does that mean that we then have social chaos because all of our seniors and people with disability who rely on that system can't get the funding they need to stay in their homes? Like, that is a very real pragmatic concern right now. What if personal information is stolen or sold? Um, we know that workers are already losing their jobs. Um, and then we also know that we have a White House and administration that is willing to mobilize and weaponize our government to go after its enemies. We know that Donald Trump is already mobilizing the Department of Justice, the sort of Customs and Border Patrol system, um, and aiming at people. We do expect that the Department of Labor and the NLRB will also be targets of DOGE. That's already a conversation that's happening. And then ultimately, there's a real question about whether there could be serious election manipulation done through databases in the US. Next slide. Okay. So I think our summary, and I think that the thing that we're trying to talk about here is that DOGE is really an example of why we need to, as a labor movement, double down on the role of worker knowledge and expertise in the data function systems of government. AI, as we see with what, the gyrations that are happening in our federal government, it's not a replacement for human judgment. It's not something that can be easily deployed by private companies that don't have effective skin in the game around how to make sure there are no errors when these systems are being rolled out. Um, the way DOGE is implementing AI is really there's no stakeholder involvement at all. It's hiding how decisions are being made. And it's a threat to many people. The anecdote that we have developed in our labor movement and our US sort of AI principles are really focused on worker voice. They're focused on bringing workers to the table through collective bargaining and consultative processes to talk about what types of technology should be implemented, how to implement that technology, and how to test it, both initially before it's deployed and then in an ongoing way to make sure it's functional. Our principles focus on training workers and upskilling them to be able to be the experts in tech deployment, and to be able to troubleshoot. And, our principles really focus on the pragmatic reality that AI is not a replacement for human ingenuity and judgment. Um, we want to sort of share this conversation about what's happening with DOGE because I think there's so much going on in the federal system right now, and DOGE is at the sort of heart of so many different types of harms. But we want people to understand that the real undercutting of our democracy is happening through database consolidation. It's happening through unchecked implementation of AI systems in government. And that's a fight for the labor movement. It's not far-fetched to imagine, this playbook that Elon Musk first developed when he took over Twitter. He's now experimenting it in the federal government. He's funding elections around the world, right? And so this puts him in a place where he can move his right-wing ideologies, but also where big tech has a sort of playbook for, accessing and consolidating data in a way that really does undercut democratic processes. Um, and so that's, I think, where my presentation ends. I would love, oh, sorry, there's one more. In the United States, there are sort of there's a major conversation about the tech transformation of government. It started during the Biden administration, and during the Biden administration, um, we were able to get bargaining principles um, that brought workers to the table in conversations about AI deployment in federal agencies. So AI, they appointed federal agency AI experts. Those experts were directed to work with the labor unions that represented their workers, and that was laid out in the Biden executive order. Trump took that executive order down on day one, and this has been the result. There's still a huge effort and conversation in the United States about tech transformation of government happening at the state level. And I think the question for us is a similar one. There is a sort of democratic version of that conversation where, democratic governments are trying to, and I mean Democratic Party governments are trying to do this tech overhaul. And that's a very neoliberal process so far. And then there's also the sort of mini DOGEs happening at the state level. And those mini DOGEs are trying to sort of do similar things at the state level by consolidating data and using it to essentially gut programs that are social welfare programs or worker rights programs. So this is happening at multiple levels of our government. Um, some of those processes are more, democratic than others, but um, I think one of the things we want to say is that data management in the tech transformation of government is something to pay very, very close attention to, even if you think your laws are in place, and even if you think you have the ability to do enforcement work. We'll go to the last slide. Sorry, my team just redid the slide deck, so I didn't realize I had more. So these are sort of, our main principles that we use when we're talking to labor unions about um, how to sort of engage around DOGE and data work. We've developed a lot of educational materials that we're using for state level elected officials. And I think that this will be a long battle in the courts. But mostly what we want to do is just sort of tell the story of what's happened in the United States and make sure people understand that data has been a huge enabling component of the changes that the Trump administration is trying to make, and the way that the Trump administration is trying to undercut our democracy. So that's my slide.
Thank you so much, Amanda. For those listening, please raise your digital hand, take yourself off of, or put your camera on so that we can see you if possible. I have a list of questions, but I want to move to those in the audience first. Before I do, just so people are aware, can you define doxing for people, and can you just define AI hallucination for those who aren't familiar?
So doxing is when someone's private or personal information is posted very prominently online. Um, and then that information is used by trolls, essentially sort of people who are acting anonymously online to bully the person whose information was posted. That could be bullying online, sort of, hacking them, disclosing even more personal information. It also sometimes shows up in the real world. That could be disclosing someone's personal address, and then people show up and harass that person at their home. People trying to undercut them at work or other things like that. It's a very toxic form of um, of bullying, and it's pretty endemic to the way that Elon Musk has tried to silence his enemies.
An AI
And
hallucination?
so AI systems, there are different kinds of AI, right? So there's predictive AI, which is something that's been around for 10 or 15 years, and it creates a lot of errors. There's generative AI, which is like Chat GPT or Grok or other sort of what they call large language models. So that's the sort of search engine, like, I want to know how to do this or this. So you can't, for example, use those systems to write a legal brief because those systems make things up. They integrate information in a way that might follow the logic of an argument, but might make up examples, for example. And so when we talk about AI hallucinations, it's a way to describe how these systems are not accurate, and they can't, they need to be checked and they need to be managed and edited. And, that's why we always need a human in charge. We can't just like unleash AI systems and expect good results.
Thank you for those clarifications. Let's go to Tim.
I'm just for the record, I'm Tim Noonan, former director of the ITUC, now seeking to make the best of retirement. The great introduction, Amanda. There's a couple of issues or points or questions I wanted to raise with you. One is there are credible reports of massive amounts of data being dumped outside of the US government system into secret accounts, presumably under control of Musk and his cohorts. We could assume that if this is not checked, that that'll go on until the end of the Trump regime. And whatever happens after the end of the Trump regime, there will be vast amounts of data in private hands, some of it still relevant many years after it was collected. And I'm just wondering if you have any comment on the veracity of those reports of this kind of dumping going on. and of the potential implications for it. Second question, when you listed on the slide the very many data categories, categories of data collection, one of them, or a number of them, related to foreign interactions, including foreign business relationships. Now, the world understands that the US border is toxic. The world understands that the Trump regime has a toxic geopolitical agenda in the main. And we also totally get what you said about the exporting of the Musk model to other countries in support of extreme right-wing or extremist forces. But right now, presumably, there's a great deal of data that relates to entities outside the United States, US government data, that is in private hands. And I'm just wondering if anyone's looking at the implications of that. We know that in the intelligence community, the Five Eyes are reviewing their relationships with the US, and presumably that's going across many different levels of government. But I just wonder if you have any comment or observation on that issue as well, as a clear and present issue, as opposed to the creeping authoritarianism export that is being done by Musk and his cohorts.
Yeah, and so I do think that's a clear and present concern, but I think the reporting on it is challenging because once DOGE gets into a database, they sort of either lock people out or create firewalls. There's been a lot of evidence of that, and so it's impossible for kind of the good guys who are still in government to really tell what's been going on. They turn off the sort of trail system that shows what data has been accessed and by who and all of those things. There was a whistleblower report that came out a few weeks ago that did sort of say that what they saw was a whole lot of uh, proxy server requests that made it look like there was a big download happening, but they couldn't tell. It looked like the download might be happening in Eastern Europe somewhere, but they couldn't really tell about it. I don't know the veracity of the whistleblower, so I can't really speak to that. But I did talk to the reporter, and so I would say that there are a lot of journalists who are looking into, how can you see whether databases are being downloaded or whether they're being copied and imprinted in other places. I suspect we'll find that they are. And I think the question is, it's like, are they being downloaded and exported for nefarious reasons like cybersecurity or sort of espionage related things? Is there sort of collaboration with foreign governments happening there? Or is this more just like they're downloading the databases onto private servers so it's easier to manage the databases? And so I think there's still a lot of really open questions about what's been done with the data, which is, I think, equally scary. I mean, how can you rely on government systems if you don't know what the hacking loopholes are and who has access to them? So regardless of whether Elon Musk is intentionally downloading this data and giving it to, foreign companies or foreign adversaries, like he's exposing the data to people who want to hack it, right? And so either way, um, you know, people who we wouldn't want to have access to this data potentially have access to this data.
Thank you, Tim. I'd ask others if you have a question to please put your digital hand up using the React button. In the meantime, I have a couple for you, Amanda. Some, the very practical questions as to what's actually being accessed, and then some more the what can we do about it from a global perspective. So one thing is Tim talked about US data going out, but also I imagine these agencies hold a fair amount of data on foreign citizens who come to the United States, who do work in the United States, who enter through the system. I mean, these are obviously already, we're in siloed databases at some point, but this can obviously be used against them, like the migrant database is being used by those who've decided to stay in the United States. And for a lot of trade unions, of course, the US is a frequent place of travel for a whole host of meetings and other reasons. And so this puts serious concern there. The other is on like US aid. A lot of trade unions around the world were recipients of foreign aid, either directly or indirectly. And if, that involves reporting, financial reporting, political reporting into those agencies. And now presumably that data is available across the government, including by agencies that maybe have divergent interests. And so we wanted to get a little bit more on what this means for those who are not American to have this happening in the United States. And then related, are we aware of parallels? Are they making this up on their own, or have they looked to, from your understanding, to other governments to sort of model this data collection and this centralization of data?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start with the last question first. In the sort of run up to the election, there was a lot of discussion of Project 2025, which is this enormous document. It's a policy document that talks about kind of how to reshape the role of government in the United States. And it's an extremely right-wing document. And it was, I think, developed by our Heritage Foundation in the United States, which is a very right-wing think tank, in conversation with Viktor Orban's government, right? It was very clear that the Trump administration admires Orban and learned a lot from him. They spoke openly about it. So the Project 2025 in advance of the election was very unpopular, and Trump distanced himself from it. But in fact, what he's doing right now is implementing it. And so I think that Trump himself is an admirer of dictators. I would actually say the data play, and I haven't looked, I think there are a lot of countries in the world where there already is this very problematic integration of public data and private interests. And so that's, I think there are a category of states that already have this type of surveillance and data model, but it may not be as sophisticated in terms of the government management systems, because our data management system in the United States has been the way it is for 50 years, and we have these massive sort of ancient databases. Regarding Elon Musk's play, I actually think that he learned how to do what he's doing from when he took over Twitter. He was online saying, well, you don't actually need that much staff if you're not trying to run an activist or a do-gooder organization. And he slashed and burned everything at Twitter. And now Twitter is this sort of very streamlined platform with no management. And it's become an epicenter of right-wing and misogynist and anti-worker sentiment. And I think that we should understand that Elon Musk is an iterator. He enacted this playbook at Twitter. He's tried to enact it in the United States. And I think that we should understand that how easy it was to sort of frog march data scientists out of the building and just take over databases. I wouldn't be shocked if that was starting to happen in other countries, in the next set of election cycles. So that's why I wanted to do this presentation. This is very serious stuff. It's stuff, when you talk about databases to the general public, their eyes glaze over. It's hard to message around it, but it is really, I think, what is enabling the what I would call sort of a coup in an internal coup in the United States.
Yeah, the ITUC right now is campaigning against what we call the billionaire coup against democracy, in no small part, what we see from Musk and his cohort, but also we see, as you've cited, examples around the world. I'll have a question later for you on sort of what we can, to finish off the call, and what we can do as trade unions around the world to build resilience against this threat where it hasn't started yet. And I'll also want to ask about we talk a lot about Musk, but this is clearly not a problem of one man, especially as he retreats from the public eye a bit. But before that, I want to go to Shanaz for your question. Please take yourself off mute. You're still on mute, Shanaz. Still on mute. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you, ITUC, for organizing such an enhancing workshop. And I would really thank Amanda for the detailed discussion on it. But regarding our country, we say that Elon Musk isn't directly accused of misusing data in India. But yes, his notorious Platform X, formerly Twitter, is involved in the legal dispute with the Indian government. And Twitter's AI chatbot and Grok has sparked controversy in India for generating responses also. And data privacy in India is definitely a growing concern, particularly with the workers. Though we have a personal data protection bill 2023, But still, Indian companies have experienced high-profile data breaches, which is exposing sensitive employee information, which is really very, very scary now that after hearing from Amanda, it's kind of an eye-opener for us also. So without a robust security measures and personal data can be misused by unauthorized parties, and that would definitely harm the workers' interest also. And we know how it would impact the workers also. Now that surveillance and monitoring, as we see in platform and gig economy workers, the biased and inaccurate data can lead to unfair treatment or decision affecting the workers' employment. And I would also like to mention this lack of data privacy in India is significantly impacting the democracy seriously because it is these unregulated data collection is are manipulating the public opinion, influencing the elections, and shaping the policy decisions in the country now. So definitely these can be used to spread targeted misinformation. And yes, till date, we do not have AFL-CIO having any specific campaign in India. We look forward to it. But there are certain civil societies who are taking a step towards it, advocating for human rights and working to protect the digital rights. I look forward from this platform ITUC to take step into it as I'm the national secretary in INTUC and an affiliate to ITUC. So I look forward to more enhancement and more knowledge sharing in this regard. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to share my thoughts about India.
Yeah, thank you, sister. I was in Hyderabad this weekend with a high-tech city that
Ah,
they're building there. So we've heard a lot about data. We heard a lot about data and democracy in
yes,
India.
I believe so.
Um,
Next time you're in India, let me know, Todd.
I will. Um, so we have about 9 more minutes. I see Tim is back with another question. Before I go to Tim, I want to go to the question on Musk in the retreat. It's noticeable now in late April that it felt like every day he was making news in the United States in January, February, early March, and that there's been an obvious strategic change in him receding from the public eye. He has supposedly a limited term contract of some kind. Um, how do you keep the attention on this, and where do you see the other threats coming from as Musk? He makes such an easy target, but it seems as if what you're expecting is DOGE to continue doing its work for perhaps the entire length of the administration. Um, are there other players? Are there other private companies that are emerging in this that we should be on the lookout for in our own countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think, first of all, this is an anecdote that I'll share with you. I'm on the National Artificial Intelligence Advisory Committee, or I was, it ended. And that is a committee that advises the president on AI policy. And I was talking to someone on that committee, it's mostly big tech companies, and they said to me, you know, 15 years ago, if you told a venture capitalist that your primary target client was the government, they would laugh you out of the room. But today, if your primary target client is not the government, you can't even get a meeting. And so you should understand that all of the big tech companies want government contracts. They want to privatize and implement AI in government because that is where the good data is and that is where a dependable client is. And so you have to understand this tech transformation of government really is a live action experiment that will impact our democracy, but will have tremendous implications for civil society. Uh, I think that right now, you're exactly right. If Musk recedes, this work will continue, but there won't be a poster boy, and it is hard to talk about it. So we have to be focused on the impacts of what this data does and following it closely. The good thing is there are a whole bunch of people who were data managers in government who are now out, who can provide us a lot of insights. And the other thing is, I think the media is quite alert now. In the United States, the idea of compiling lists of people is something that is the public does not like that, right? And so really focusing on how the data is being consolidated and impacting people is key. And then I would say that Palantir has really, really benefited a lot. Peter Thiel and the Palantir group. Um, there are other big tech companies that may not be as public or as anti-government in their rhetoric, but they certainly will benefit. from the sort of shakedown of government data, and will be lining up to help with the reshaping. And so, to me, when I think about AI and its implications on work and democracy, this is the fight. This is the fight of our lives. And I think it's true in other countries too. I would say that there are many countries in the world who have been experiencing this fight for a lot longer than we have in the United States. And so there's a lot that we can learn, particularly countries in the global South who have dealt with this kind of privatization for decades.
Thanks, Amanda. Tim?
Sorry to come back, but in the absence of others, I thought I'd take my chance. One of the very important functions of the Department of Commerce in the past decades in the US has been oversight of internet addresses, and basically it was at one stage the kind of controlling authority of the internet. That's been weakened. The authority ICANN is now in a much more strong position and more independent position. Nevertheless, what you've described would appear to mean that Elon Musk could go very, very deep into internet addresses, root zone, whatever the techniques are, which is a very, very scary thing internationally, I think. And I'm just hopeful that some people in the US are keeping an eye on that front as well.
Yeah, I think EPIC is probably, and Electronic Frontier Foundation are probably looking closely at those issues, but that's very true. And I think, in my own work, I've been so focused on the domestic implications that I haven't had the bandwidth to explore some of the international implications. But it's a good point. I mean, the US is the epicenter of so much. And it's not only sort of safeguarding against this happening in your own country, but also what do we need to do? How do you fix what's been broken here? Because I think it's unlikely that we'll be able to kind of put the genie back in the bottle. And so the question is, in 2 years, if we're able to get control of Congress back, what do the fixes need to look like?
Particularly when they potentially threaten the interoperability of the internet worldwide.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the reaction we get to this discussion too is, that it's maybe American centric, which is a very fair critique. But at the same time, the internet was a DARPA project, and the connectivity of the US to the rest of the world, the US has rooted itself for a whole host of economic, political reasons as the center of a lot of data storage, data formation, data transfer. And so it's hard not to talk about the outsized role the US plays in when things like this happen there to the rest of the world. So Amanda, to close us off in the last 3 minutes, I want to bring this back specifically to most of our participants are coming from, which is the trade unions. We know from talking with our colleagues at Public Services International that there are probably certain groups of people that have more data points than others in the federal system. That might be women who access government services at a higher rate in many countries. That might be young people who are in student loan or federal assistance programs. It might be low-income people on federal assistance programs, migrants, and of course, seniors, which you've talked about with Social Security. But among these is trade unions, especially in the United States. Some of the most documented organizations in the United States whose finances are public information already. And you talked about them coming to the DOL a bit, but there's an extraordinary amount of data on unions, on settlements, on employer disputes, on individual workers in federal government systems. So what can unions do to, if you could wind back the clock 5 or 10 years in the US and tell unions to do something differently, to build more resilience, or to prepare for something like this, so that those who may be in countries, there are some, like you said, that I've been experiencing things like this for a long time. But for those who haven't and are looking at this and sort of going, wow, what do we do? What kind of advice would you give? What kind of resilience can we build?
I mean, I think one of the reasons that Liz and Rich created the Tech Institute was to help unions really develop their understanding of how, data and AI and in these types of technologies are actually union work. And so these broader questions of kind of surveillance, we think about surveillance as in the workplace surveillance. These technologies break down the boundaries between work life and home life. And so I think there's a question of how do you think of your members as whole people, and think about really building an agenda that is safeguarding your members at home and at work, their financial interests, their rights, their civil liberties, their private information, that is in fact union work. So getting your policy staff to develop the capacity to work with unions, to get their members educated, and to start building that into your policy agenda, data privacy, data rights, and to think about it as more than just data privacy in the workplace. That is incredibly important because that is how automation happens. It's how unions are busted. But you have to also understand that your members can be surveilled and tracked and harmed at home, at the bank, at the grocery store, at the doctor's office. And we have to be fighting for workers on all of those fronts.
And with that, that brings us to 4 p.m. Central European Summertime, which means our call is over. I want to thank Amanda Ballantyne and the Technology Institute of the AFL-CIO for spending an hour with us today to give some insights as to what's really happening, because we see so much in the news, like Tim said, that it's nice to have some trusted source on this for trade unions. And for others, we will have, of course, future webinars as part of our campaign for democracy that delivers, including on subjects that have come in light of the rapidly changing environment in 2025, caused in part by what's happening in the US, but not exclusively there. So you'll see there are links in the chat to actions that are being planned right now, to the billionaire coup against democracy materials that we've already shared out by email. And we'll look forward to seeing you all on another webinar soon. Thanks again, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.